Friday talk show slash Twitch podcast, the Friday Flash Forward. I'm Reese Perry, better known as Lolties, and with me is Callum Matthews. How are you going, Callum?
Yeah, I'm not doing too bad. What about you, Reese?
Not doing too shabby. Just got myself a new bed during the week. Bit of real life took me away from last week's games and solving a lot of problems already. So hopefully, after somewhat of a week off, I'll be able to get right back into the swing of things for what is shaping up to be a very exciting week of OPL action.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you're not the only one having problems with your beds. I mean, Achilleos had to take a break from the LCK this week.
Oh, did you? I didn't hear about this. This sounds like a story.
Yeah, he had to be available for delivery, so Atlas took over.
Ah,
Lo and behold, it was also for a bed.
that sounds amazing. Anyway, let's get straight into the games. I managed to catch the replay of Legacy. They play Tectonic, right?
Tectonic, yep.
And I did catch the match of the week, Chiefs Avant live, but I didn't catch the other two. So let's quickly have a touch on what I missed. What did we? We saw a bunch of 2-0s this week. Most of them were expected. The first one being Bombers and Order, I believe, right? Was the first game on the docket.
Orders vs Bombers was the first game. That was the head-to-head with the Melbourne organisations. Fairly expected result with Order taking the 2-0. But once again, we have to talk about the Bombers and how they performed against Order, who, as most of us have expected, have put them at the top 2 of the league. So what do you think of the Bombers?
Well, they looked pretty. I didn't catch this match, and I haven't yet managed to watch the replay. But if they were anything like they were in week one, then you have to hope that that sleeping is as good as Tiger, because Tiger was amazing in week one, and by all accounts he was pretty good again in week two. Especially if you have a look at the piece that we put up that was written by Bensel earlier today. He had what sounds like another good performance. So if sleeping is as good as, they have something to be excited by. But otherwise, it seems like the occasional Baron steal by Seb and Tiger's strong performances is all they've got to stand out for them.
Well, once again, I think at this point we're going to have to say that Tiger performing is going to be a regular thing. Get another really good performance. In fact, I'd call him the only real player that was able to do anything on the team. The rest of the team kind of fell around him. But on that note, very safe player, but maybe he needs to play a little bit more aggressive.
Okay. And we'll skip past the next match. We'll come back to that because we're going to go a bit more in depth on it. So moving into Sunday, we have what seems to be a pretty quick and, dare I say, relatively effortless 2-0 for Direwolves over Sin.
Even got the pocket pick Yasuo coming out for Sin for the doink.
Big doinks.
Unfortunately, he was not able to pull it off.
That's a shame.
But we did see Dream have a very good performance.
It's good to see. He was pretty solid in week one as well. Like, made a couple of I can't remember who I was talking. Might have even been you I was talking to about this with. Kind of make mistakes where you'd almost expect him to make mistakes as a rookie player coming sort of in off solo queue and a very small amount of OCS, but into the big stage made mistakes where you'd expect him to, but sort of displayed himself to be, shall we say, not completely hopeless on this level. And so you're saying he was respectable again, was he?
Definitely respectable, especially considering the fact when you get the Direwolves lineup that he was against, to be able to play Varus and not die on a regular basis, it's quite a feat.
Yeah, that's a low mobility champion. If the rest of the map is crumbling around you, it's a juicy dive that you see there, especially pre-6. And we finished the weekend with Legacy Tectonic. Now I did manage to catch the replay of this, and Tectonic had moments of promise, I want to say, maybe early game, but really as the game started to tick past 15-20 minutes, they just got, in my opinion, pretty quickly outclassed. What did you see there?
Definitely agree, but I think it was interesting what Tectonic tried to do in the draft. Well, Legacy being known as a team that is very safe, very composed, they're not going to look to do too much in the early game. Tectonic went, okay, we know what they're going to do, and we're going to play a late game draft against them. So in that respect, I was quite happy. But the problem here is with the execution. Legacy were able to build a lead, and Tectonic weren't replying.
Right. So elements of at least that all those coaches are coming together to make a solid plan, and now they've just got to. You'd hope it's just a case of, particularly with such a young roster, getting some stage time together to build the ability to execute on some of these plans that they're putting together. So what we'll do now is we'll just double back to the match of the week, which was a 2-0 for the Chiefs. Now we covered this match in a little bit in the preview on the flash forward last week, and if I remember correctly, I declared that in with a level of confidence that was standing confident on a house of cards that the Chiefs outclassed Avant in pretty much every role, except for maybe the jungle. But I wasn't quite prepared to stake that boldness to the 2-0 win that the Chiefs ultimately got. So, what did you see from this match, and what was the primary reason that you think that the Chiefs were able to take out the 2-0?
So I think first things first, I want to credit AV for the draft that they did put together, at least in the first game, going in and saying, okay, we do have inferior laners, we need to look for a different way to win. And it's through that we also see Chiefs able to pull out the win. So in the first game, we saw AV come out and pull out the Gnar, the Jarvan, the Galio. And what that did is basically allow AV to abuse the weaker lane, the arguably weaker lane of Swiper and Tapabu, where we saw Swiper die over and over and over again,
Yep.
with the synergy between particularly only in Pabu being quite on point. But also through that led to a dynamic where you have the bot lane and it's creating more of a one threat comp. And
Yeah, for sure.
the problem with that is if you're having a one threat comp, you need to be able to accelerate and keep accelerating through that early game into that mid game. But the problem we had with AV is they had a mid game fumble. And if you call our plays of the week, it was included in there. And we saw Blinky and Jake not fall back from the turret early enough. And that created a dynamic where Chiefs were able to nullify the momentum AV were building and basically stall out for the Azir. And I don't know if you've seen Ryoma's Azir, but he's possibly the best on the server.
Definitely have. I do remember, and this is something I actually want to get into a bit. This is one of the things I wanted to talk about with this match in particular is that I'll get your thoughts on this concept in the abstract, and then we'll bring it back to this match. As you mentioned, that Tommy Roma is a what we would call a legacy Azir player, which is a little bit pun intended, because this was back in the days when he was a member of Legacy Genesis. And we obviously, when I was working with Sin, we faced him in a relegations match, and even though Azir was out of meta at the time, the fact that he was such a strong Azir player is something that factored into our preparation for that match. So, what do you think about maybe not so much pocket picks, which you would tend to associate with off meta stuff, but when you've got a pocket or legacy pick for a player that something that is strong on meta, how do you like to handle that? And you're obviously you're a former coach and a recent analyst for OPL teams as well. How do you prefer to handle legacy players and pocket picks like this?
I think well, first and foremost, I think it depends on the player and it depends on the pick. So I think, at least for Ryoma here and his Azir, I think it's easily comparable to, say, a Bjergsen and his Syndra, where if it's in meta, you're probably going to want to take it away, purely due to the fact that the player is so strong in the pick. But on another note, if you're expecting that to come out and and you might prepare a counter pick. So for Avant, they prepared the Galio, which, while last week I was a little hesitant, it's obviously come out as one of the big mid laners now, and I think credit to AV, they're ahead of the meta a little bit. But the thing is, you have to execute, and if you don't execute, then you're going to just feed into the player's strategy.
Okay, so you say it's an execution thing. Then, in what different way would this like? So, if we're looking at the Galio as the matchup specifically, like, what is the point of this counter pick? Is like, what's the Galio trying to achieve into the Azir? Like, starting with the early game.
So what Galio is mainly trying to do is Galio is going to try to nullify a lot of Azir's push throughout the early couple of levels. That's mainly due to the fact that if you do have a jungler, AV in this case, we're using the Jarvan, and it will create kill pressure. Obviously, Ryoma ran the cleanse to nullify a lot of the kill pressure, but that kill pressure is still there through those early levels. And moving into level 6, what will happen is Galio will have to seed mid pressure, but by seeding mid pressure, it'll allow him to perhaps go into a top lane or go into bot lane for AV. They were able to get him in the top lane and was able to create a snowball for Pabu. But unfortunately, what happens with that is you lose chip damage, and if you start to lose momentum, you start to lose tempo, then that becomes a free mid turret. What becomes a free mid turret becomes an open map. What becomes an open map becomes snowballed vision, and everything just starts flowing. So
which I imagine makes it pretty hard to execute on what Galio wants to do, which is to move safely into areas where he can cast his ult from. So where exactly has this gone wrong for Avant? Because you're giving them credit here for their idea. Um, the one thing that's traditionally been said about Azir generally is that he is a mage that does very well into tanks because he has really good. He's not a mage in the traditional sense, so it's probably wrong of me to put it like that. But that he has really good sustained damage, obviously through his sand soldiers, so he's able to do a lot of work on tanks like Galio. So that seems to me, and from what you're saying, that the point of the Galio is to be able to hold mid and then be able to accelerate other lanes. And we did see him get up, particularly in game one, repeatedly into Swiper's lane and get more than one kill. All of those kills ended up on the Galio. Was that a problem, do you think, or is that totally fine? And then it was this lead was fumbled in other ways, maybe such as the bot lane play that you talked about earlier.
So for the dynamic that AV were looking for, particularly in that game one, and subsequently their game two, is they need to look to accelerate the Gnar. The Gnar was their main win condition in the end. Being able to push in the Ornn, be able to continually ram down the turrets in the split push, but unfortunately, they weren't quite able to do it. While Pabu did have a good performance, the problem was, overall, the map kind of just started to fall around him, and that's what you expect when you've got a one threat composition.
So it's more of a case of the rest of the map rather than the fact that the kills went onto the Galio as opposed to say the Gnar, not huge enough to make an impact, which is one of the things that I was thinking about.
I think it definitely makes an impact, but I'm not sure if it quite makes up for enough of an impact to completely nullify the mistakes that they made in that game.
Okay, so the other thing I wanted to talk about that this sort of flows into is that you're talking about the one threat comp, and at least in my experience watching games, not just in Oceania, but from around the rest of the world as well, is that we're seeing sort of two and a half threat compositions. And Avant went with one. Maybe if you're talking about a Gnar, like there was Gnar Ezreal that had in game one, if memory serves. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So Gnar Ezreal is kind of one and a half. But you until you unless you're getting TP flanks in, the Gnar shouldn't really be with the rest of the team. So it is realistically a one true threat composition. Is that maybe that when you've only got one threat, you can't really afford to give up plays like that bot lane play that we've talked about now a couple of times.
Yeah,
So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
you can't really afford to let go of any tempo, especially when that one threat is an Ezreal. Because Ezreal, while he has a really strong mid game, he really does peter off into the late game. And on that point, if you are to look at the Galio as being an AP build, even though he is an AP champion, like he can one-shot people, but the problem with that is the way Galio plays, he's kind of looking to poke. If he pokes, he isn't quite dealing enough damage, and he's never really going to be able to safely get that all in. So it creates a little bit of an awkward situation with the AP Galio. Don't get me wrong, I think the pick's great, but as
The other thing
being
as well
a
is that
threat, I don't know if I'd call him a threat unless
yeah,
he's accelerated to a great deal.
I think the thing about Galio being a damage threat is that the way that Galio needs to itemize to do that, it takes a lot away from what Galio actually wants to do, which is contribute to fights from afar with his ultimate land in and start landing taunts and knockups. And if you're landing into the middle of a team fight, with a full AP Galio that does a lot of damage, then you're liable to get one shot. It's kind of not what you want to bring. Not what you want to tele. Or what's it called? Heroic entrance,
I believe so.
hero's entrance. So yeah, whatever
Heroic
that
entry,
ability is
hero's
called,
entrance.
hero's entrance. That's not what you want to be bringing into the middle of the fight. Is a full AP Galio. So the way that he itemizes is not really um, helping being a damage threat. So which is really asking a lot of your Ezreal. And it's I guess if there was any match you were going to do it, this was probably the one because you've got an off-role player playing AD carry. But as we've discussed, not just on Snowball but on this very program before, Fantix is no slouch of a player, and he certainly seems to be not that. I mean, a little bit off the pace, but not hopelessly out of place on AD carry. In fact, I saw. Did you see the Chiefs video that they made during the week?
No, I haven't. What happened?
So it was just one of those short, good value pieces of content, and they Fantix talked about his lane opponent being below par and that the match was quite easy. So apparently, um, if your one threat is considered easy by an off-roll player, then maybe that wasn't the right game plan. But I don't really want to place any particular blame on Blinky, as you say. There was a lot of other things that the team fell down on rather than just individual performances.
I mean,
So
like the mistake that I'd say in particular is what caused the snowball in game one. You could even pin that down to communication, so you really can't just point out, say, Blinky and say it's his fault.
no doubt. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move into week 3, which is upcoming, and there's a couple of obvious things that jump out when we're talking about week 3 for the OPL, and the first of that is that the Great Oaks competitive rulings have run their course, and that all the rosters will be, barring sickness, at full strength, which is very exciting
This is definitely exciting, particularly if you're a Bombers fan.
for sure. Now we'll run through these. We'll sort of go. I think let's just bring up the current ladder and go top to bottom. I think, and we'll have a look at each roster that's bringing back a player and give a quick rundown on what we can expect from those players. And I had the ladder ready, and I've closed the window. I am a professional. Okay, so um, not quite. There's some shenanigans going on here. Somehow Order is first among the 6 pointers, despite not being first alphabetically between Legacy and Order. But luckily they've always had their full roster, so we can skip past them. Legacy is the first one with the player returning in Mimic. Not too much known about Mimic. There wasn't really a lot of footage that I could find available of his previous pro games. What can we expect to see for Legacy with Mimic instead of Series?
So, Mimic is obviously coming from Korea. He's our first Korean import, I believe, into the OPL.
Nope. Third.
Ah, it's third.
Bomb and Cookie.
Ah, true. I think I missed Zazuhu. I think he played a game or two. Not 100% sure.
Or he might have played a couple actually for Tainted Minds in their first split. That's a good pickup. So fourth.
But definitely the first for Legacy.
Yeah, and probably certainly the biggest profile.
Definitely coming from the European Challenger Series at some point, I believe.
Actually,
So
yes.
I think, obviously, coming from Korea, holding a Challenger ranking is probably going to have a significant upgrade over Series, at least on a mechanical standpoint. Whether his team play is quite on the same level can be argued. But at least for the mechanics, will definitely be an upgrade. Obviously, not too much to go off. Haven't seen a lot of footage of Mimic, if any at all. So it's hard for me to really gauge what to expect. I just know apparently he's tearing up solo queue, so that's obviously a good sign.
Yeah, I was hoping to find him on the ladder, but I can't see anything that jumps out as being him. Anyway, um, the is that from what I remember seeing is that he hadn't been playing much in the way of tanks on solo queue. In fact, I think Bensel wrote something at some point that said that he hadn't played any at all on his main solo queue account, which was interesting to say the least. Um, Lucio likes to run a tight ship. Do you think that we're gonna see some secret tanks come out of Mimic, or do you think that they've brought him in to carry and that's just what they're gonna do?
Maybe later on into the year, but at the current point in time, obviously the top lane carries or pseudo carries like the Nah are obviously all the rage at the moment. So this could be the time to really pull out Mimic, let him get comfortable to the competitive scene in Oceania, and really just let him do his own thing.
For sure. Moving on then to the next team, which is Direwolves. Now, it almost feels like they haven't got anyone back because Praelis has been super, super good, but they do have their star player Schönfire coming back off of his competitive ruling. Um, Now, the scary thing for the rest of the league is that they've got 2 match wins, and now they're adding Schönfire back, and it just feels like, as good as Praelis has been, that they're gonna get even stronger, and by quite some margin in ways that Praelis probably can't really do. What are we seeing here for Direwolves?
I think with Shern coming back, you're obviously going to see an upgrade in the jungle position, but not what Schönfire brings to the team is not necessarily just a jungler. He brings a lot of leadership. He's very vocal as a player. And if you look at the Direwolves lineup, I wouldn't really say anyone's too vocal of a player. So the fact that they've been able to come in and be able to pick up the 2 wins and even be quite clean, which is something that we didn't see from the Direwolves in the past. So
For sure.
Shern coming back could be a little bit of a double-edged sword because obviously Schönfire was probably driving shot calling for Direwolves last year, and if in fact he's the reason that they're playing so aggressive and so in your face, then it could come back to hurt them a little bit.
That was one thing that always felt like, oh, it felt like that the Direwolves were exploitable because the way that they were so aggressive kind of felt feast or famine, and it was only through Schönfire's real, like, will or ability, that all of these things were working for them. To the point where it's like, oh well, it can't just be good fortune that all these aggressive plays keep working for them. I definitely agree that the way that Sherm plays, if they all of a sudden stop working for whatever reason, could come back to bite them. Who's their fixture? Bombers, right?
Uh, Bombers.
Yeah, we'll get to that later.
Check.
That's an interesting.
Yeah, Bombers.
That's an interesting one. That'll be a real good matchup. For like I said, for reasons that we'll get into later. The Chiefs, this is a really interesting one because the Chiefs haven't played bad by any stretch. Obviously, they've fairly comfortably handled Avant, and they dropped what you felt was a winnable match against the Direwolves. But the Direwolves have shown that they've been really good, and the Chiefs were definitely competitive. And they get an on his day they get an absolute monster back in Rays. What are we seeing here for the Chiefs?
I think for the Chiefs, it's going to be a little bit less drastic. ADC obviously being the position that I like to call plug and play. The reason for that is the ADC isn't really the one that drives the bot lane, it's more so the support, and if you're seeing an ADC being relevant, it's more so in those really late game team fights. So for the most part of what I'm going to say 25 minutes, the ADC isn't too noticeable. And obviously we've been seeing games in Oceania that are going like 27 minutes, maybe reaching the 30-minute mark. So for Chiefs, it's going to be a little less noticeable. Obviously, Ray's a fantastic player, as is Fantix, but might be a little bit less noticeable for them.
Okay. Avant get back their coach Charlie. Um, we've just gone over a little bit about the innovativeness of their drafting. You had perhaps a kinder review of it than I would give, but having Charlie back in the room to account for any unusual picks or bans will be good for them. I think what we saw out of Brucey is that, and he would probably tell you this himself, is that his leadership in the coaching role was more of a pure coach than that of a strategic coach. So from a pick ban perspective, should be good for Avant to have their coach back on stage. Yeah.
I definitely think so, and that's more so purely from the standpoint that you need somebody who knows what's happening in the draft to be able to say, yes, this is what we pick here, or no, we shouldn't pick that, or even give the players a little bit of freedom when it's deserved. That's not
Yeah.
what you get from a pure coach. Pure coach, sure, he can drive motivation, but when it comes to the drafting, at the end of the day, might not be the guy you respect to be able to do your drafts.
for sure. And now we're getting into probably the spicy one, the Bombers, who get back what feels like their whole roster, even though it's only two players. But it seems like so much of what this team is built around. They get back sleeping for the hodgepodge mess of top lane situation they had. I just want to pause on that for a moment. What did you think of the decision to bring in Bushy Boo Boo over Artifernes?
That was a
I
really
guess,
intriguing decision, as I consider Bushy Boo Boo as more of a fill play, not really a true top laner. Whereas Artifernes is definitely a top laner, top lane main, and to me it didn't make too much sense. I would say Bushy Boo Boo is significantly weaker than Artifernes in the top lane, at least from what I know about the two players. Obviously, watching solo queue and what I've seen of Artifernes in the OCS, to me it just didn't make too much sense.
yeah, I agree. Did you hear anything about whether or not that was like, was he not available on that day, or if they just dropped him for due to week one, or they were just sort of seeing what they had? Did you hear anything about that, or nothing at all?
I heard nothing at all, so from the outside
So
perspective, I can only assume that Artifernes wasn't available.
you'd
Because if
hope
he
it
was,
was
it
unavailable, because
pretty questionable decision.
yeah, because the only thing that he sort of did wrong was that unfortunate teleport, where he teleported the wrong place, and I think things were going wrong for Bombers a lot earlier than that. So if that is the case, I'll be that they've dropped him for for the week one performance. I'll be pretty disappointed. So yeah, they get Sleeping back, well, not Sleeping back because they never had him arguably, but they add Sleeping for the first time to this roster, which is really really exciting because the other import, as we've talked about a number of times, Tiger was really really good, and if Sleeping is anything even close to the player that Tiger in is his role, that they can genuinely 2v8 even if their other three players aren't playing well. That's not to say that they've been playing badly, but if they were to, these could be two really exciting players. The combo of Sleeping and Tiger. What do you think of firstly bringing Sleeping back?
I think bringing in Sleeping is obviously going to be an upgrade to the overall team. I think what's really interesting is Sleeping plays a lot of Riven in solo queue, and you know what we saw the other night?
No, it didn't happen. Didn't happen.
The Khan pentakill on the Riven,
Didn't
so
happen.
especially against Direwolves, where Chippies has been playing a lot of Gangplank, never
Hmm,
know what could happen.
spicy. Good old carry off. The other change that they'll be making is bringing back Luch for Choo Choos. I, to be honest, don't know how I feel about this. So we'll go with what do you think about it firstly, and then I'll see if I can sort of organise my thoughts as to how I feel about this change.
So I think Luch is a player who in Oceania has probably one of the highest potentials of a mid laner in the region. The problem with Luch is he's never quite been able to synergize with his team. He'll always pick up those ridiculous fast hitting numbers, but never quite feels like he fits in the team. And the problem with that is when you look at Choo Choo's and look at legacies Choo Choo's got behind him, he's always kind of fit well with the team. So Luch coming back might create a little bit of synergy problems, I might say. Obviously, Luch has played with Seb in the past, but they never quite gelled. But
Yeah, no
also on
doubt.
that point, Choo Choo's also did have a little bit of bad week, so all in all, probably say that Luch is still an significant upgrade purely because of the week that Choo Choo's has had.
You know what? While Choo Choo's definitely didn't cover himself in glory these last 2 weeks, I kind of do want to push back a little bit on like maybe on the degree that you've gone to there, calling it a significant upgrade. I think that Luch is sort of banking on the rookie of the split honors he got in obviously his rookie split. That's what you get it for. And then we saw when he came back from his first competitive ruling in Split 2, he was really a shadow of that player, and he was, to be honest, sometimes he was just straight up playing terribly. It was some of, frankly, the worst Oriana play I've seen on the professional level. I don't want to be, I don't want to court the mistress of hyperbole too much, but it was some really, really smelly Oriana play at times, which is a champion that he's known for. Um, so I'm a bit hesitant as to exactly how much of an upgrade this is going to be, and obviously he's coming off his second competitive ruling for toxicity. And if I may. He's very fortunate to only get 2 weeks for being a repeat offender. It just seems to be that if he's acting this way in solo queue, and you hear rumors along, scattered gossip throughout the way that perhaps he's also not the most pleasant person to deal with in general when he's not winning. So that maybe sometimes his mouth is writing checks that his gameplay is not cashing.
Potentially, but personally, I like to believe in players. I think Luch has the potential to be one of the best mid laners in the region. He does have like quite a unique playstyle in the mid lane. And as I said, the problem is, will he be able to synergize with the team? And even in his rookie split, where he was rookie of the split, his synergy with the rest of the team was still questionable. So
Definitely.
I think it's really a question of, can Windows Monkey be is Windows Monkey able to bring Luch into the team, and is Luch able to perform?
Definitely. I guess maybe I'm just the Grinch, the Grouch of us all. Um, I do agree with you in the sense that he does have a lot of ability or potential, as you called it. The challenge I see for Luch is that the one thing that I don't think he's been willing to do is to take the hit personally to get his team ahead, and that's the challenge that he'll need to overcome to get back to those heights that he reached back in 2016 when perhaps mechanical ability was the only thing, or not the only thing, but the most important thing relative to the ability to work together as a team being the most important thing that we've seen over the last year and a bit in the OPL.
Yeah, definitely agree. And I think, especially when you do kind of start to compare splits, that 2016 mid lane was also a lot more impactful as an individual position as compared to
Fair,
what it is now.
completely fair. So the last team with a roster change to make, because Tectonic don't have one, do they? No, they don't. Is Sin seeing the return of Kuden. Now, first things first. How do you see this shaking out?
Personally, I don't think it's going to have too much of a difference. Honestly, I think Kuden is probably a little bit past his best. I think that Kuden is a player that thrives in a meta where it's casters. Obviously, he's known for his Soraka. As Asian would say, woo woo. But
We're not doing that.
yeah, I'm not going to put it up in the voice, quite the same voice that he can. But I think Kuden and K-pop, at the end of the day, probably quite comparable players. Both players, I'd say, would thrive in the caster meta, but they're both not particularly noticeable as individuals players. And unless Kuden's bringing something to shot calling, which as a veteran player is very possible, I don't think it's going to be too much of a difference.
I think that I mean, he seems like a nice guy, so I don't want to slate him here too much, but I guess I'm gonna have to. I've never been particularly impressed with K-pop. I did think that this recent couple of weeks on Sin has been probably the best we've seen of him, notwithstanding the unfortunate mistiming on the alley combo. We've all done that. And when I say we've all done that, I know I've definitely done that. So maybe that is a bit of an indictment on K-pop. He probably shouldn't be making mistakes that I make. Um, the but I think like Kuden's a player who I have um, both. I've had a sort of topsy turvy opinion of over my time. I thought that not the year, sorry, the split that Ray's what I think it was rookie of the split. He might have even still been Zeratul at that time, although I'm not sure. When he first split 2016 on Direwolves, I think he got rookie of the split, and I thought if Kuden, I wasn't involved in the OPL in 2015, so I don't know if Kuden had played in 2015. But if he hadn't, I thought that should have gone to Kuden. I thought he played better than Rays in that split. And then I really felt he fell off a cliff to the point, and this is a story that I don't want to go into too much detail on because it was um, it's a somewhat personal story. I was talking to Jews after one particular split. I think it was after split one last year, and I was explaining to him in TeamSpeak as two other people joined, one of which was XJ, or Guts, I should call him now. As I was talking to him about Kuden, I was saying that he was washed up, And it turned out that the second person who had joined TeamSpec at that time was Kuden. So I was basically writing him off to his face, though I didn't know it, and he took it remarkably well, better than I have ever seen anyone in the scene take criticism. So I've kind of got a bit of a soft spot for Kuden after that, and I really want to see him do well because it showed a level of maturity. Um, he didn't flame me, didn't go ballistic at me, didn't bring up that I was bronze and didn't know what I was talking about, even though that's something that a lot of players have been very keen to do. He really took it very, like I said, with a very mature manner and approach to it. And although the level of competition is not the same, played pretty well in the OCS that split for Abyss Academy. So I really want Kuden to do well. I do think he is an upgrade over K-pop, although where I will agree with you is that probably won't matter. I think that the Sin have a considerable level of growth before they're going to be competitive. I've seen enough out of them in the. I mean, obviously, I didn't see last week's match. I saw week one though, and there's enough in there that's encouraging about Sin to make me think that the growth is attainable. But I do think it's going to take some time, and it won't be very much fun for them in split one. I think that's going to be a real challenge of Vicarious and Milky and even Sebi to sort of keep morale up on the team through what might be what seems like it's going to be a very tough first few weeks, possibly first entire split, before you start seeing this roster pay dividends.
Oh no, I definitely agree. I think bringing in players like Bedoink and Dream, players making their competitive debuts in OBL was a little bit of a gamble by Sin, especially when you are losing the caliber of player that they lost in Ryoma, FBI, Dokler, and Rogue.
Yeah,
It's a little bit of a gamble, but I really hope it pays off. I think that Dream in particular has shown that he definitely belongs in the OPL. Whether he belongs to stay in the OPL is obviously a different matter, but he's definitely shown me enough to say he does belong there.
yeah, I
As
agree. He
for
actually, it's just if I can just jump in quickly, kind of seems a bit like a poor man's FBI, which might sound like Flame, but if you can play similar to but slightly worse than FBI, you're still a very good player, and you're definitely you're going to belong in the OPL. So the challenge is out there for Dream to show that maybe not only can he be like FBI, but he can match that given enough time and development. And I think having those two leaders on Sin like Juves and Kuden will be good for that, particularly Kuden with it being his lane partner. Having that experience will be really good for him. But sorry, I cut you off. You were about to say.
yeah, as I was gonna say Bedoink quite hasn't shown me enough to say he's belonging in the OPL. Obviously, Bedoink has shown his signature Yasuo. But unfortunately, that didn't pan out too well. But I think with time, Bedoink will probably show that he does belong. I think out of the OCS mid laners that were available from last year, I think Bedoink was obviously one of the better ones to pick. Obviously, Frey was picked up by AV.
Yeah, I was gonna say Frey was the other one that stood out, obviously.
So
Just
he was
quickly, I do remember tuning into this match briefly because if memory serves, at 10 or 15 minutes into game one, I forget which point, his Yasuo was playing in a matchup that's not a very favorable one. Is that right?
Oh, he
What
was
was it
playing
into?
against the Malzahar.
And that's not something that he does well into. Is that right?
You can have a
Because
little bit of lane pressure throughout the early game, but obviously Malzahar being Malzahar, if you get ganked, Yasuo doesn't do too well against ganks and kind of just crumbled after that, unfortunately.
it's also like one thing that Mazahar likes to do against mages is win wall important spells, and there's not a lot of win walling to be done against Malzahar. Um, but anyway, he was up in CS at 10 or 15 minutes again. I forget which what it was. I was at the cricket, if memory serves, at that time, and I briefly tuned in the break and play to see that he was not doing too bad in that lane. Now Yasuo, to be fair, is a signature pick of his, so you would hope he's doing well on it. But it's not a sensational matchup, and he did do okay. So um, I would definitely say that the cupboard is not bare when it comes to the talent of Bedoink. Now that's Yeah, that's it. That's all the roster changes we've got. The other change we're going to have moving into week three, aside from the rosters, is what we believe. I don't think it's been officially confirmed, but I think every other region is starting on it from this week. is the debut of 8.2, which is seeing two pretty noticeable changes. The smaller of the two is the changes to Kleptomancy, which has seen a slight drop off in Ezreal priority, at least in solo queue. So we would expect him to take a dip, but he was still heavily prioritized. So I still expect him to be pretty strong. Is that your take on it too, or have I missed the mark on this one?
I think the Kleptomancy nerfs obviously will have their impacts on notably Gangplank and the Ezreal, but I think they'll still remain in the meta. I don't think the priority will be quite as high as what it was. But obviously, being able to accelerate gold, particularly on champions like Gangplank and Ezreal, will always, as long as it isn't gutted too hard, will always kind of see them remain in the meta, even if it is as a little bit of a niche.
Sure. Now that, of course, is secondary to what the big nasty monster or obvious change in 8.2 was, which was the re-rise of the Yeti himself, Nunu. Now, my understanding is that the patch will be the hotfixed version of 8.2, so he won't be completely gangbusters like he was on patch release, but that's still a nasty Yeti roaming through the jungle. What are we going to see out of this Nunu?
As a Nunu enthusiast, I was really disappointed by the hotfix. Unfortunately, it meant that you could not duel every single jungler throughout the early game. Quite
That's a shame.
disappointed.
That's a
Damn.
real shame.
Because it's really balanced that you can duel the other jungler and take all their camps. But with Nunu, I think that we're going to see a rise in at least priority in pushing lanes. So obviously Nunu is a champion where he needs to be able to get into the enemy jungle to truly be relevant, or even say get a dragon. You need to be able to have that pressure. But on that note, I think what's really brought Nunu back into the meta is the buff to Blood Boil, and we're going to be seeing 40%. Blood Boil gives 40% AP. Obviously, it's capped a little bit at rank 5. It caps at 120, but 120 AP to a mid laner is like accelerating them like 2 to like 3.5 items.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a death cap basically.
I mean, if
mean,
you throw in the death cap, it's 164 AP.
yeah, well, I mean, it's not literally the whole entire death cap, but you're basically getting death cap passive almost.
Hey,
It's a cap death cap passive, isn't it? Basically.
comparable to.
Oh, is
Comparable
it
to.
40%
Obviously,
of
a little bit
40%
less.
of Nunu's AP or 40% of recipients AP?
Recipients.
Oh wow, that's
Well,
gross.
sorry, recipients and his own. Obviously, you're
Yeah,
not going to
yeah,
be seeing the Nunu build AP. There were some
yeah.
builds built in the Runic Echoes, but unfortunately, with
Those
the
people are
nerfs,
trolling.
the nerfs reined it in, so Runic Echoes
Oh,
wasn't
okay,
quite
so it's
viable. But
pre hotfix running Kekos. That'd be gross.
yeah, the interesting with Nunu is that he can, due to that Blood Boil, he can bring different champions back into the meta, whether it be for one game or not. But I think that's a really interesting, really interesting side effect, because you could see champions like Syndra crop up. Obviously, 120 AP to a Syndra is massive. Being able to burst that champion that what 5 minutes sooner, it's massive.
Yeah.
You put on a Xerath, where you've got the long range artillery. Obviously, skilled Xerath player is going to make a lot of use of that. And obviously, we'll look at Azir, and Azir is, let's just say, Azir is busted with Nunu. We aren't going to see that combination. I'll tell you that right now. That is not going to happen.
Take one or both of them out.
Take one or both, but definitely not both are being picked on the same team. If that happens, I will probably just close the stream, because I don't know if I can witness that.
Go away for 20 minutes, come back, the game will be over. Maybe not quite so much. So what else? You mentioned the Xerath. Obviously, Azir has always been a pick that's been associated with Nunu's Blood Boil, just because of you're getting double value on Blood Boil, not just attack speed but AP as well. I've heard a couple of rumblings that Ziggs is a champion that works well with it, though I've not personally seen that interaction. Is there anything else that people should be keeping their eye on?
Not notably, but I think at the end of the day, every single mid lane is going to make use of it. There are just some that, at least to me, stand out. The reason I said Xerath is I think Xerath is a little bit on the edge, and being paired with Nunu could push him slightly over.
Does it make Ezreal? Does it make up for the Ezreal's loss of power and Kleptomancy? Because obviously Ezreal is something that is a champion that benefits off AP and AD scaling.
Well, the problem is Ezreal isn't going to be building much AP, so he really won't get that effect of the AP bonus.
We'll get free value on his abilities though, yeah.
Uh, if he has AP in the
Oh no,
build,
but it's sorry, it's a percentage buff. I'm an idiot. Yeah, no, never mind. I done an oopsie.
yeah,
I forgot it was percentage, not flat. Never mind me.
was trying to lead you in the direction
Yeah, no,
inch by inch.
I was too busy digging down to realize you wanted me to dig up. No man, I'm busy. I'll dig up later. So Zerath's your big pick as to something that might poke through the fringes of the meta. Um, and would you expect to see Nunu picked, or is it going to be a ban priority?
I'm willing to say I'm expecting you to be probably banned in, I want to say 70% of the games.
So we're looking at seeing it maybe slip through bans in one, maybe two games, depending on how many of them go to three.
Yeah,
Maybe as many as
exactly.
three times. Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, is there anything that we should be looking out for in terms of champions to pick into the Nunu? You mentioned that the pre-hotfix versions, the Nunu didn't really care too much and would just duel anything. But post-hotfix, is there anything that we should be seeing that's picked into it?
Not off the top of my head. Because the thing with Nunu is he's always been a champion that's always been a little bit fringe. If he's in the meta, he's like ridiculously strong, and that's because he negates what a lot of champions are wanting to do.
Sure.
And that's why we saw, I think it was in 2016 at MSI, I want to say, it was SKT versus EDG, and we saw EDG pull out Evelyn, which became the
Yep.
counter pick
Famous
for Nunu.
pick to...
Obviously, Evelyn has been reworked and won't have the same effect, but I think if you see Nunu, I'm expecting picks that come out to duel him. So, notably, I'm going to say the Kazakhs.
I don't say Kazakhs is one that I'm thinking of, but
That
it's not really been seeing a lot of success in Oceania.
No, but also on the Kazakh, it really relies on a heavy invade style, but obviously if you're pairing Nunu with pushing lanes as you should, then the Kazakh loses value. So it's really difficult to really pinpoint any champion in particular, at least in the current state of the meta, to really counterpick the Nunu, unless you're going for like a late game scaling and like a Zac, but that's not really a counterpick.
Sure. Alrighty, so this probably brings us about to the end of what we're going to be covering this week. Just quickly before we go, have you got your tips there? Have you done them already, or have you got in mind who you're going to be tipping for this week of action?
Oh, just need to pull those back up quickly. Okay, so I had a 2-0 for the Chiefs over Tectonic.
Same.
The 2-0 over Order for Order over Sin. I think those two games are quite self-explanatory.
Might be an early afternoon nap for me on Saturday, I dare say.
I think Sunday is going to be a little bit interesting, where we see AV and Legacy. Obviously, Legacy having 2 games against arguably the weakest opponents in the OPL. Pulling out to the 4-0 against AV, who many are saying are the 4th place team. So that could be an interesting series. Personally, I'm going to go for a 2-1 to AV. Obviously, I don't think Mimic will quite have the time to settle in with Legacy on the competitive stage. But it'll be interesting to see how he comes head-to-head against Pabu and Only in particular, where they're showing great synergy. So maybe they can exploit Mimic in some way.
Yeah, it is interesting to note that, of course, that because Sirius has been playing the first 2 weeks, that he has only been splitting scrim time until this week with the team, so that might hamper his development. The other thing that might help Avant as well is that, as you mentioned, Pabu and Only are looking strong together, and they did work with Sybil last year, so they will know a lot of his tendencies, and if they do their prep, as Charlie I know is very good at, then that should be an area that they can exploit is that top jungle synergy that might not be on point yet between Sybil and Mimic. Although having said that, I have gone different to you. I've gone 2-1 for Legacy in this series.
I almost went 2-1 Legacy. I think that the synergy that Pabu and Only have been showing is what tipped it over the line for me.
For sure.
But on that point, I think that Soul Strikes has obviously been working well with Sybil. Sybil obviously had really good pathing, at least in the early game last week, where we
Yeah.
saw an early first blood due
Yeah.
to
He definitely had a
pathing
stronger week 1.
variation.
But
Obviously, they
stronger.
scouted something and they were able to capitalize. Maybe they'll be able to pull that out again. It's always a possibility. But moving into
And
our last game for the week,
yep.
I had 2-0 for the Direwolves.
Yeah, same. I don't think it's enough of an in to take down the Direwolves.
As much as I'd like the Bombers to pick up a game or even the win, unfortunately, Direwolves are obviously reigning champions. I think they're just too strong. If Bombers are to take a victory against the Direwolves, I don't think it's this week. It has to be later on in the split. Obviously, Sleepy and Luch are just coming back in. They've probably been splitting scrim time. I just think it's an awful week for the Bombers to be seeing these players returning.
Yeah, it's a bit of a rough one for Bombers. Really, you hope that they sort of don't get too invested in their roster paying off week 1. If they do, don't get me wrong, that's sensational result for them. But play for the best case, and maybe don't be surprised by the worst. I think, yeah, like you said, it's a rough first week for this new roster. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
It's unfortunately the case because I'd really like to see Bombers just come up and really just blast some opponents. Like, I've been watching Tiger. The guy's been playing great. Really want to see the guy get his first win in a pro scene. Great player.
Definitely, yeah. So let's hope he can get it done this week, or if not, we see some more strong play out of him to get Bombers fans at least something to continue to be excited about, because he has definitely been that factor for that team. But having said all of this, I think that's about all we have time for. We've gone a little bit over time, I think, again, but that's all right. We had a lot of interesting stuff to talk about and cover for the last week and this week of OPL action. Have you got anything to wrap up with there, Callum?
I think all we really have to cover is what our game of the week's going to be.
Oh, good one. Yeah, it's you know, I'd like it to be Direwolves Bombers, but I think the obvious one that stands out is Avant Legacy. Avant are really producing must-watch League of Legends, even when they're not winning. It's some really good ideas and interesting stuff that they're doing, and though it always seems to be compelling viewing when they're on. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely agree. I think, especially with AV playing the way they're playing, and Legacy obviously bringing in Mimic over series, arguably an upgrade. Also, we obviously have the Sybil matchup against AV. It's just too easy, too hard to miss. Like, AV Legacy, lock it in.
For sure. Alrighty, folks. Until next time, then, you can catch all our coverage and work on snowballesports.com or on Twitter at snowballesports. You can find Callum at CDMLOL, myself at LOLTIES, and our other I guess staff members, for want of a better phrase, Andrew Ray at aray7. I should have prepared this. Yep, aray7, and Swifty at Swift_Y. Until next time, you guys, we'll catch you later and see you next time on the Friday Flash Forward.